I mean, the thing that I could not get over was that it is straight up grifting. It's a total shakedown, and it doesn't even claim to be anything else. There's no other way to look at it. This isn't like you said, they aren't trying to engage these patents or move technology forward. All they're doing is stifling creativity in technology, stifling creativity in business to work this loophole to grift people out of money any way they can by retrofitting old patents onto new technologies. And that seems to me, and it always did, to be completely immoral and not appropriate.
That's comedian and podcast host Marc Maron. Marc was an early pioneer of podcasting with his show, WTF. In fact, I suspect that for many of you, WTF was the first podcast you listened to. But what you may not know is that one day he saw all of that threatened because he received a legal claim from a company that claimed it had a patent on podcasting itself.
Marc and his producer, Brendan McDonald, are joining us today to talk about what it was like to face the threat of being shut down by a patent claim. They're going to tell us how they turned from victims to activists, fighting back and raising awareness against companies who abuse the patent system.
We're going to dig in to how to fix the internet by building a patent system that protects creators like Marc and Brendan, and maybe even you. I'm Cindy Cohen, EFF's Executive Director.
And I'm Danny O'Brien, a Special Advisor to the EFF. Welcome to How to Fix the Internet.
Marc, you've been a stand-up comedian for more than 30 years, and since 2009, you've been hosting the wildly popular twice-weekly WTF with Marc Maron. Now, you and your producer, Brendan, worked together on the show, and I'm excited to talk to both of you about how you rallied together with other podcasters and EFF to push back and ultimately win on a topic that is admittedly a little geeky, the patent process. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a crazy time.
And welcome, Brendan.
Yeah, thanks, Cindy.
Marc, before we get to how to fix the problem, let's start with your story. Tell me what happened when you found out that a company called Personal Audio was claiming ownership of the patent on podcasting.
Well, I didn't know what those letters were. I think they came through the actual mail. Isn't that right, Brendan?
Yeah.
Didn't they come through the actual mail? It was just this letter with this letterhead that looked like it was, just made up. And it said, we own the patent, or you owe us licensing fees of $25,000 or something crazy. And I'm like, this is silly. This isn't anything. And then Sam Cedar, a guy I used to work with, Brendan and I, he was like, this is real. And I'm like, what do you mean it's real? So then I had to learn, what a patent troll was, what this meant, what it meant for everybody. They sent 3 letters. It was getting crazy. There were other podcasters listed on the letters, and I didn't know what to do. And Brendan was like, yeah, this is a real thing. And I'm like, what does that mean? Does it mean we got to pay him money, or if podcasting is over, or that, I need a new machine? I don't know what it means.
My initial sense of it was that the biggest threat was going to be if we made contact with these people. Like the number one thing, do not reciprocate any kind of communication here, and let's just try to build a strategy. But building a strategy was hard. As Marc, I'm sure remembers, we were really, we still are an independent operation. But back then, in those days of podcasting, like everyone was pretty much an independent operation. There wasn't a lot that we could actually do as a collective unless we mounted some type of strategy around that.
We had to educate ourselves first and foremost about what it really meant, because none of us were really making that much money. And there seemed to be some assumption in the language that we were billionaires. So once we started to understand what this meant, and what that small town in Texas meant, and what that sympathetic judiciary meant, and what these like weird kind of storefront addresses with no office in them meant, that it was just this racket, then we had to figure out how to push back, and we had to figure out how to do it as a community, which we weren't essentially a community, but there was a group of us who were podcasters, and we did each other's shows, and we were in contact with the bigger podcasts at that time. So we had to figure out how to come together and solve this problem. But when we really start to dig into this thing, and you start to realize what it would take to defend ourselves, we had to have like a meeting. this sort of like weird clandestine meeting, it felt like, over at Adam Carolla's house. And he has a full bar, like an old style bar built under his swimming pool. And it was me and Carolla and a representative from Nerdist and someone from Jay Moore and I think someone from Kevin Smith's operation there. And we're all sitting there going like, this is real. Adam's sort of like, yeah, I don't know. Yeah. He's like, yeah, we'll see. My lawyer, this, that, and the other thing. And I was freaking out. And Jeff Ulrich from Earwolf was freaking out because we realized that, no other podcasters took this seriously because they only aimed it at us.
I want to back up a little bit and, because you referenced a couple of things. So this small town in Texas, there is the Eastern District of Texas has become a centerpiece for litigation around patents. And so patent cases go there. It is an area that is very focused on patents, which means it's got a bunch of judges who take these kinds of cases, and it is a location where a lot of these entities called non-practicing entities set up shops so that they can sue in Texas. So all of this is the kind of thing that I think, ordinary people shouldn't be expected to know, and you guys had to learn, at the point of a lawyer dagger.
So I want to just ask, specifically, when you got these letters, what did they claim and what did they want from you, Brendan? It
was a very broad statement and it was encouraging outreach. That was the number one thing. Please reach out to us because you happen to be in violation of our patent, whatever the number was, and we would like to discuss a licensing arrangement. Like all of this that was apparently like, in the wording of this, a fait accompli, this is it, this is done, you're just going to have to go along with this. So, but very general, there was definitely a sense that they were not trying to threaten, but just coerce. I think we wound up looking at 3 of these letters at once because we had basically ignored the first 2, like did not even open them and had not seen them. So we had like 3 letters back to back and they just seemed fishy, like Mark was saying from the start. These didn't seem like things that we should be engaging with.
It was like a cash grab. It was a cash grab. Like they were like, give us $25,000. Because, we own the licensing of this thing that you don't understand. And then when you really start to focus on the technology they were focusing on, it was like, that's crazy. That's like saying, you owe us money for drinking that soda because of the pop top. We own the patent on that. It was nuts.
And what was the patent on? Did they ever say that?
Yes, you can read the patent. It was some sort of menuing, a daily updating menuing system or something.
What?
Yeah, essentially like aggregation. And so it was retrofitting any kind of playlist apparatus to mean this was solely intended to be the delivery of periodical information. And like that was what it was hinging on, was this was like invented as a way to basically have podcasts around magazines and newspapers back from 15 years before.
Yeah, but it was like a cassette technology. It was like, the original application of the technology in question wasn't even in the medium of podcasting, or it didn't even see that it was primitive digital stuff.
One of the problems that we have seen in the patent system is that we've got this whole flock of patents that take something that you might do without a computer, add a computer, and then claim that this new thing is patentable. And the podcast patent was one of many that we worked on that. And it's one of the reasons why people, including EFF, feel like, so many of these patents that are software patents are really just that.
When you start to realize that they're just kind of retrofitting this stuff on to newer technology, and you start to realize, I think both Brendan and I realized at the same time, is that it's a shakedown. It's clearly a shakedown. There's no validity to it whatsoever. It's a business built on grifting. And then you start to read about how these patent trolls can get payouts from large technology companies that, can afford to throw a couple $1 million to stop a lawsuit. But if these guys were organized, the big fear for me was if they really wanted to organize themselves around this patent and push it through, everyone would have to pay a licensing fee to these people, depending on the percentage of income that they had or what were willing to prove. And they could have made a fortune if they were organized, but they were just grifters. So it wasn't about that.
Well, also the scary thing to me was seeing the previous kind of cases that involved patent assertion entities and how long the legal process was. And that was my bigger fear, was not so much that, we were going to have to start paying out, but that kicking off this fight was going to basically make doing the podcast just not viable anymore. We were going to be underwater with legal fees just trying to defend ourselves. But we have to fight this before the actual lawsuits start.
So this was pretty early on in podcasting, not like now we have like thousands and thousands, but it was far enough along that people were kind of making a name and getting pretty successful about it, like worth hitting them up for a few dollars. So
Maybe.
So you decided to fight back, right? And like, how did you strategize? How did you decide what that looked like? Because you didn't want to get into a court case, right?
It was sort of a slow, weird process because we wanted to fight back. But we knew that, not unlike a divorce, that the shakedown was they would bleed you until you gave them this base amount. So the assumption they made is like, here's where all the money is. But very few of us were making that much money. Certainly not enough money to even afford, half of a lawsuit that it would take. So we ended up meeting with this consultant guy, a bunch of us, again, at Corolla's garage, who was like the troll warrior. Like, what you remember that guy's name?
Yeah, sure. It was Drew Curtis, who was from the website FARC.
Oh, wow. Drew.
Yeah, he sat us down, the group of us, and said, all right, it's going to cost about $300,000. I got a plan. We're like, wait, what? I can't afford that, And then ultimately what happened is, because Brendan and I had worked with you guys to raise money for some other stuff you were doing, we had a relationship with you. I said to Brendan, this has to be in their purview to take this on, and we should make them aware of what's happening in our industry around this. And it was like a Hail Mary pass. We were like, come on, EFF, we got to help us. That was the strategy. And when you guys took it up, we were like, man, I tell you, it pays to have friends. I tell you.
Well, we were so happy to do it. You're right. EFF has long been concerned about the problems with patents. We'd been doing work in this area for about a decade before you guys got caught up in this. We call them patent trolls, right? Because you have to pay them money to get along your way. We have something called the Mark Cuban Chair to eliminate stupid patents, a hilarious name that Mark made up, that Mark Cuban made up. But we also, have been tracking stupid patents of the month and other sorts of things. And so we were, both, in this way that lawyers are sometimes, both delighted and horrified to hear from you, horrified that this was happening to you and delighted that we could do something to help. But really, this was a team effort. You guys did a lot of work to organize and bring in the very nascent podcasting community around this.
It was a panic. And I got to tell you, it kept escalating. And, I'm already panicky. And we had reached out to nascent networks who were building networks and, trying to build a relationship with and trying to make them guarantee that they would protect us from patent trolls. There was a network starting to build up, and I said, do you have the money to make this go away? Because if not, we're not interested.
Wow. So you really had to make like big decisions based upon this threat. This wasn't something that was just a little thing on the side. It was very central.
No, it's crazy. It was like, to me, it's like a thriller movie.
Part of what happened here that's different from when we usually deal with patents is that people kind of deal with it on their own, right? They get this letter and they're scared to talk to anyone. And, they might be competing with the other people who get that letter. That's another thing that happens, right? You send it to everybody who's kind of trying to fight it out with everybody else for a market share. One of the things I took away from this story is that everyone talked to each other and ganged up to fix this. Is that something that was because of the early nature of the podcasting community, or is that what comedians are like, or what?
For me, I know all these guys, and at the beginning of podcasting, as it exists now, or as it did then, many of us were in the same business, and we all kind of knew each other. And there was a period of time where we were all doing each other's shows. We were all very supportive, primarily, the original 10 or so that were, kind of making headway, and we were peers. So it was really a no-brainer to sort of check in with everybody. Certainly Corolla, it's not like we're buddies, but we're certainly in the same world. He was in the hot seat. So it was natural for us to say, what is happening? But ultimately we needed information and we needed to raise awareness in the community that this was a real threat. Many people were not registering it as a threat. And there was a core group of us, certainly me and Brendan and Ulrich, who were like, this is real and it can shut us down.
So, Brendan, how did you raise awareness?
Well, I think I realized at the time that the entire thing that our product was based on was having a direct line into listeners' ears every time we put the product out. And all of this stuff we're talking about the growth of podcasting and how we were all starting to see a little movement and we didn't want it to die off and we wanted it to thrive and we couldn't let a threat like this happen. That was all possible because of this devoted audience and these followings that our shows were creating. And I just knew as long as we started speaking about what this was, it gave us an advantage that other people fighting patent troll fights didn't have. We had this platform.
Yeah, we could troll the trolls.
Well, and it's inspirational. It's important. We work with so many people who get these kinds of patent threats who feel so alone. EFF has a whole session of what we do on these patent things, which is to try to bring transparency, to try to make it clear to people who get a threat about what's going on with all the other threats. And the thing that was so fabulous about working with you guys is you did all of that work yourselves. You guys figured out that there were other people, that this was happening. You pulled the community together. And as part of that, you were able to stand up. And it worked in tandem with the legal work that EFF was doing, in the direct challenge to the patent.
Well, I forgot that we were busting on him on the show, and it definitely got through. I remember there was conversations like, should we, shouldn't we? And it was like, why not? And we started sort of pushing back and getting people worked up. And, they're cowards, really. But I'll tell you, man, when you guys started working on it and you had all those lawyers working on it, and I learned what prior art was. And, there was a point where I think people were sending us prior art. They were sending stuff to us to try to prove our case once we started talking about it publicly. And it was kind of amazing to learn the structures of how these patents work and what you needed to sort of, Death Star, to blow up the Death Star.
So the way this worked was that EFF and the Berkman Center for the Internet and Society at Harvard put together a petition to the patent office. So sort of very limited ability to challenge patents after they're issued. And one of the arguments you can use in that is what you said, right? Is that there's nothing new in the patent. This is not actually novel. And that there was something called prior art available.
It was fun because we used some of the stuff that you guys collected. We also used old EFF friend Carl Malamud had a thing he called Geek of the Week that he did back in the 90s where he interviewed geeky people. He actually interviewed me. I got to be a geeky person in that. But there was also some online things from the Canadian Broadcasting System that we used and some online broadcasts by CNN. So there were things that were happening, long before Personal Audio showed up with their patent that we were able to use, and we were able to win at the PTO, at the Patent and Trademark Office. But, this went on for a long time. Personal Audio appealed it. We had to go through the courts. The Supreme Court finally turned down Personal Audio's request to have this appealed one more time. And that was really when the moment it was finally over.
It made it to the Supreme Court?
We went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, talk to the hand. The lower courts were right. So Personal Audio took it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Oh, my God.
And that was really the victory at the very, very end.
Now I'm mad at them again.
That's the plan. So, I mean, how did it feel to just have something like this hanging over you while you're still trying to make a business out of this, Mark?
It implied a vulnerability that, we had no control over, seemingly. And that, whether or not something like this could happen again, who knows? But if it weren't for us educating ourselves, bringing the community together, and then working with you guys to elevate our understanding of what we could do to fight it, I mean, it made us feel a little better. But you don't, when you're just, all of us podcasters are just a bunch of people going like, wait, I just need a mic. And it's like, you don't think about this stuff. So, really realizing that you're still in the world of technology and you're still in the world of that's much more complicated than you can ever imagine. But there's no real reason. There's no reason for me to think about, this daily menu loading system every day. But it made me think about it. Can they just come after us for every piece, like I said before? So it caused a tremendous amount of anxiety for me for a long time. So the victory was, not unlike my divorce. So but the fact that this guy brought it to the Supreme Court just makes me, now I still have a problem with him. I thought it was over.
Well, it is over. The Supreme Court didn't let him go. But, one of the things that happened along the way.
Who are these guys? What is this idiot? What do they do? What are they just sitting on a pile of patents going like, let's try this one?
Yeah, that's actually what happens, is that you collect together patents. So you become like the patent troll forms by buying up other people's patents. So they don't, this is one of the things, right, is that in a classic patent troll situation, they don't exercise the patent. The idea of a patent is, you have like, I don't know, Edison or something, and they make play a piano, and then they build player pianos. But these patent trolls just have the patent. They have no plan on producing a podcast of their own. And I think that's one of the ways you can spot them, as opposed to someone, genuinely going, hey, I invented that, you should really pay something over to us.
The weirdest thing about the process was like accepting the fact, like trying to put it into perspective. Like I thought, and I'm not a big business guy, and I'm not an entrepreneurial thinker. But like I said before, I thought that the worst thing that could happen if this personal audio had their stuff together, that they could create a broad sort of licensing fee for all podcasters. Yeah. And I thought like, all right, well, if that's the hit we got to take, all right, so be it. But they don't even think like that. Their big mistake was thinking we had money.
How to Fix the Internet is supported by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation's program in the public understanding of science, enriching people's lives through a keener appreciation of our increasingly technological world and portraying the complex humanity of scientists, engineers, and mathematicians.
We work with people all the time who get these patent threats, and we can represent a small amount of them, and we do it for free. We're pro bono, but like many people can't afford the lawyers even to respond to the letter. Or those who can, then they just pay the money and they go on. They just pay the toll to the troll and go on. And so this was such a special situation because everything was in line so that we could do it. But, it wasn't without lots of twists along the way. One of the things that Personal Audio did was that they tried to force EFF to turn over the names of all the people who had given to support the fight. People were freaking out because some of these were podcasters who weren't yet in the sights of Personal Audio, and they were terrified that if their names got out, that they would, find themselves on the back end of a cease and desist or a lawsuit. So,
oh my God, these guys were terrible. I just pictured this room, this army, this war room of lawyers, like just going at it in the name of the cause. It was all very exciting. I really see it as a movie of some kind. I don't think it's, it's not like the Facebook movie it's not that exciting of a movie, but that's how I pictured it.
Well, it felt that way. And, we were lucky. We had a good judge who followed the law and recognized that people have a First Amendment right to donate to a cause anonymously. And that, absent some evidence that there was something untoward going on, the judge was not going to just turn over all the donors to Personal Audio. So we won a First Amendment victory along the way to the podcasting victory.
Who's writing this book?
I will say, though, that, as we're talking about this in a, very positive light, there were things that didn't work out while we were doing this. And that, to me, it sticks with me that, for instance, one of the routes we were going to take, since obviously like massive legal fees were off the table for us and we had to find help somehow. And, thankfully it did pan out in the work that EFF did, but we also tried to go the political route with this. There was bipartisan legislation that was on the table and it was politically wound up being a non-starter. And that was very discouraging. Thankfully, the other track we were on, working with a nonprofit, panned out, but the political process was not as optimistic.
Yeah, sometimes it's good to have three branches of government, right? We try to keep this podcast focusing on a positive future. Like, how do we fix the internet? What does it look like if we fix the internet? And I think you've hit on one of the things that is an ongoing challenge for all of us, but also what it'll look like if we fix it is that we're going to need to probably fix the patent law a little bit.
I think you have to turn the whole thing off for a few weeks.
That's how you...
Yeah. Unplug it and plug it back in and let it reboot.
Let's have a conversation culturally without it on.
Well, I think that's true. And, this is where some of these software patents end up in this world where people are talking about pharmaceutical patents and other kinds of patents. And so in the congressional conversation, trying to separate some of this stuff out and focus on it has been difficult, but it's still centered to the work. And it's tremendously important because we had this tremendous victory for you guys, but we need to have victories for all the people who get threatened by trolls.
Some folks identify the problem as basically you can patent anything as long as there's a computer in it. And those are either software patents or also business patents, right? So they patent a way of doing business. We could just throw that whole side of the patent business out. Mark, does that strike you as a good solution, or from what you saw of the patent system as it is?
That would have to take a whole restructuring of how we understand patents and a sort of a reckoning with these people that look for specifically those things to grift.
You're getting at the nub of it, of course, which is that we have to have a solution that protects the creators, the people who really do patentable work. I don't think patents themselves are bad. They can be very wonderful. But we need to protect the creators, and we need to weed out the grifters in this situation.
And also targeting this non-practicing entities, right? I think that's the thing that sticks out is you feel it's a grift when you're not even talking to the inventor. You're not even talking to someone who said, look, I made a thing, right? You're talking to someone who just sends those letters out.
And somebody who took it all the way to the Supreme Court knowing that. I mean, they knew it. We obviously put a bug up their butt, or they wouldn't have done that. I mean, why would they wanted to get all the names to see who was making $12, so they could what? They didn't even have the wherewithal to shake 5 of us down for $25,000. So what was he going to do with all those names? But it obviously upset him enough. And it seemed like, to me, it feels like a pride thing that they had the bread from other grifts to really push us all the way through to teach us a lesson. That's how I take it.
One thing we haven't talked about, Brendan, is this whole Eastern District of Texas patent court scene. Did you have to deal with that?
We didn't. We never got dragged into it. We just wound up educating ourselves about that particular district. Mostly seeing other case studies of what had happened there. Well, I believe there was a This American Life episode about a software developer. When they replayed that episode, they do an update. And they interviewed Marc for that. And I remember listening to Marc's interview that got tacked on to the beginning of that. And Ira Glass being like, yeah, if they wind up in that district, they're going to have to pay. And I was like, man, it's a done deal if this happens. And that's the thing we have to avoid. We actually have to fight this now and fast. Like, timing was of the essence. Otherwise, we were going to be in trouble.
We have had some good luck at the Supreme Court, especially with a case called Alice v. CLS Bank a few years ago. This was a groundbreaking decision that basically says, you can't make an abstract idea patentable by simply adding a computer. Now, the case didn't go nearly as far as we'd like, but it has helped. Another one of the problems in these kinds of situations, and that we spend a lot of time on at EFF, is the lack of transparency in how these court cases go. I mean, we know that there's this court in the Eastern District of Texas and lately also in the Western District of Texas, but we don't know a lot about what goes on there inside the cases. And if you're in the next person in line who gets dragged there by a patent troll, it's actually very difficult to figure out even what's happened with the very same patent. We've ended up taking on transparency a lot just to help people be on the right foot in order to know, has this patent already lost in another case?
And we're just trying to do a little show. I mean, that's just a weird thing is when your brain opens up to this world, is that I rage at the machine and the levels of grift possible, and that knowing that it's a multi-billion-dollar a year business, isn't it? I mean, patent trolling. So when there's that much money involved with anything, it's getting a green light somewhere. Somebody's getting paid off. So it becomes very difficult to stop that.
Yeah, and from a societal perspective, all that money, the money that, that you guys get shaken down for, that the non-practicing entities are shaken down from other people, or even the big companies buying up as many patents as they can so they can, protect themselves. This impacts people directly like you guys, but it impacts all of us because all of the resources that are going to this whole patent game are resources that aren't being spent, to develop cool new tools for us. So, this is why we think of it as an innovation drain, both directly and kind of indirectly. For you guys, the story is pretty simple. What would the world look like if this didn't happen anymore? If people, if we fix the patent systems and little guys who were trying to build something cool and new didn't have to face this gauntlet and didn't have to pay the troll to go over the bridge.
All I know is that the world needs more podcasters. I mean, there's just not enough podcasters. So hopefully when everything gets solved, we can just add another 100,000 or 200,000 a week of new podcasts to the pile.
What we can do is move the patent trolls into podcasting, right? Like they would probably do really good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
podcast.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah.
They can each have a podcast.
I'm surprised there isn't one. That to me, like us suggesting it, living in the shameless doubling down culture we live in, some miserable patent trolls can be like, that's right, it's a business. Let's just do a podcast.
And the thing is, they'd be the only people who could legally do that, right? So it would be the only podcast and the best podcast by definition. Great.
Right, exactly. That's all that's left. Just two patent trolls going, we won. No one can do anything.
But we are fixing the internet here.
Oh, yeah.
I love this. But we are fixing the internet here. And I think that the answer here is it's hard to talk about what the world would look like if you didn't have trolls under the bridge. But I guess I just want us to pause for a moment and think about that. And what are the kinds of innovation? What are the things that we could see?
When I use apps like, sadly, an app that got very popular last year here in California were these different air quality apps and, apps that sort of, help us kind of adapt or adjust or correct climate catastrophes and sort of get like the city, all these apps that, bring people together, bring communities together, raise awareness of things that are wrong. That should be, there should be an app to, alerting you if there's a patent troll in your neighborhood or on your devices, trying to figure out how to drain money from your account. And they have those kind of apps. So, I mean, it seems like, and any sort of creative things that, painting and whatever, drawing and things for kids. But ultimately, if we got all this malignancy out of the way, maybe we could help, kind of curing the problems that we're in.
Yeah. And I think it's worth noting that the people who actually invented podcasting did not patent it very specifically, right? It was, and I'm not going to get into who did it because there's always a little bit of an argument about that because no one has a patent on it. But very specifically, they gave it to the world. It was an open system that let anyone do it. And it wasn't Apple. It wasn't, Sony. It was a few people who said, you know what, we're inventing this and we'll make a bit of money out of it maybe, but most importantly, everyone gets to use this. And I think that's the future of tech for me.
Some things are good to be owned and other things are good for society to be able to mix, burn, and build upon. And I think that when it comes to ideas and technologies and things that we all want to rely on, we need to strike that balance right because, too little and we don't reward creators and we want to do that, but too much and we end up blocking creators too. And so we have to find that sweet spot in the middle. And I think it's clearly the case that the patent system isn't striking that balance correctly right now.
Exactly. I agree.
Well, also, when you talk about balance, you have an imbalance between, massive, multinational global companies that are benefiting from products on the internet and just the whole entire infrastructure of how it's run and private creators. And, in the kind of like techno-utopian version of the internet, it was supposed to be the private individuals and the creators who were helping to grow the global community around what products they were using, how people were able to advance information. And you talk about that imbalance of like, what is the internet? Who's it for? Is it for big corporations or is it for people to be kind of an open source resource for everyone? When you're talking about how you fix something or how do you get a different trajectory for a problem that could persist, it really is about emboldening people with their choices. You can fight this, and here's how, as opposed to get that letter, don't know what it is, be scared, and send the money. Like, that's what we want to avoid going forward. And then, you fill in the blanks leading up to that. How do you prevent people who are entrepreneurs, creators, and just regular people from having to deal with that?
And that to me is the great moral of the story that you guys did, which is that you pulled together some people and you were empowered to stand up. My friend John Perry Barlow used to say, nobody gives you your rights. You have to take them. And you guys took your rights back, and we were delighted to get to help. But also, I think it shows a model for other people who are facing threats from bullies, whether they're in the patent system or some other place, is that one of the keys to being able to fight back is to, first of all, don't feel like you have to do it alone.
Yeah, if you get one of these letters, drop us an email.
info@EFF.org is where we is the first port of entry, and we'll make sure that it gets routed around. We can't do all of them, but we try to get help for everybody who asks us for help.
Great.
Well, thank you so much, Marc and Brendan, for coming on and telling us this story. I think it's an important one, and I love stories with happy endings.
Yes.
And if you've enjoyed Marc on our podcast, you might think of subscribing to them. It's just a little thing we do to try and move, up the status of your podcast,
Yeah.
Marc.
Your struggling little podcast. We hope to send traffic your way.
We're doing what we can. We're doing what we can,
Well, that was just terrific and so fun to get to retell the story of that great victory with you guys. Thank you so much for coming on and telling that story to us again.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. Thanks for the work you guys do.
Yeah, thanks a lot. We really appreciate it.
Well, that was just terrific. But what it really drove home was how terrifying it was to be on the receiving end of that cease and desist, and then just to realize that this was something real. The focus of this podcast is generally to talk about what it looks like if we get it right, but we really did have a glimpse there of what it looks like to be caught in a system that isn't fixed.
Right. And what would have happened if they'd managed to get that podcast patent sustained? Like, how many podcasts would actually exist if you had to pay a fee? I mean, I imagine the way it works would be that you would have the big kind of companies doing it. You'd have CBS podcasts, you'd have the BBC podcasts, but this whole ecosystem below it would have just dried up and vanished.
Yeah, and the kind of cool things like Marc's, sitting in his garage asking people questions, it just wouldn't be able to exist.
Yeah, I think this is the first time that we've had someone who's directly faced a legal threat on this show. I mean, most of the episodes we do, we have fellow travelers, fellow experts who talk us through how to make things better. But it is fun to talk about the nitty-gritty of how you actually move things forward, especially when it's the kind of legal work that EFF and others do. Does this count as impact litigation?
Well, not strictly. Impact litigation is usually where you're aiming to make a judicial decision that helps protect a whole bunch of people. It's true that we protected everybody who podcasts when we won the podcasting patent, but we really didn't change the law as much as get the law applied correctly in a particular instance. I mean, I may be splitting hairs here. We did litigation and it had an impact. So I guess on that level, this is impact litigation.
Yeah, I think we tend to talk about policy changes or technology changes, but this is how you achieve specific changes, and it all starts with someone wanting to push back.
Yeah, and I think that's the central piece of this story that is so heartwarming, right? Is that the way that these guys were able to really rally this, very nascent community of podcasters. And I would say in some ways turned it into a community of podcasters and pulled together this. And of course, the fact that they all had microphones and could talk to their audiences played a big role as well. But I think it points the way to how we make a better world. This shift from thinking about, oh no, here's me, I got this threat, I'm very scared, and I feel very alone, to we're going to build a community of people who are going to stand up and fight back. It's critical in so many of the stories that we've heard.
And, if we're going to build a better internet, if we're going to improve the future of the internet, we still have to preserve that thing, which is, for instance, when we were fundraising so that we could do this lawsuit, we put up a website and people donated. And no matter how hard they tried to get the names of those people, it was the internet that allowed us to get the money to do that. And it was the internet that allowed all the podcasters to get together and spread the word. So, making a note to ourselves, those are the things that we would like to keep.
this piece, which isn't really one of the things they teach you in law school about how to make things better, it ends up being key to fixing issues on the internet, just as I think it would be fair to say probably is key to fixing things offline as well. Special thanks to our guests today, Marc Maron and Brendan McDonald from the WTF podcast. If you haven't listened to it and you're one of the few people who hasn't, please tune in. It's a lot of fun.
And while you're at it, why not follow us too? Please visit EFF.org/podcasts, where you'll find more episodes, learn about these issues, donate to become an EFF member, and lots more. Members are the only reason we can do this work. Plus, you can get cool stuff like an EFF hat or an EFF hoodie, or even an EFF camera cover for your laptop. Nat Keith and Reed Mathis of Beat Moa made the music for this podcast, with additional music and sounds used under Creative Commons license from CC Mixter. You can find the credits for each of the musicians and links to the music in our episode notes. How to Fix the Internet is supported by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation's Program in Public Understanding of Science and Technology. I'm Danny O'Brien.
And I'm Cindy Cohen.
This podcast is licensed Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International and includes the following music licensed Creative Commons Attribution 3.0, unported by its creators. Warm Vacuum Tube by Admiral Bob, featuring Starfrosh. Drops of H2O, The Filtered Water Treatment by Jay Lang, featuring Airtone. Xena's Kiss / Medea's Kiss by Emwick. Warm Vacuum Tube by Admiral Bob, featuring Starfrosh. And Recreation by Airtone.